Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Thursday, May 14th, 2026 at 9:10 in the morning. So we won't have Legislative Council Rick Sagal with us until 10 o'clock, but we could utilize this time just to have some more committee discussion on that 71. Finished walking through 3.3 yesterday with Rick. Had the color changes. We also received a document from Maggie Lenz. That was provided to everyone, I believe. Everyone was on the email list. I hope everyone's had a chance to take a look at it. Maybe we can have some discussions on that, or what's in it, from the issues.
Do you want me to start?
I don't know that we need, I think we already know where you're at. Communicate that, that's fine.
I think what we, and here I go. I think what would be helpful is for the base, for us to start with the base. And I understand we're going through and all this stuff is added in with the colors, and I'm wondering if it would be better for us to set the bar, the base as passed, updated for kids code, because I want to make sure that we're consistent. And I think that then we take that and in a separate document, the different clauses that are wanting to be added in. That to me feels like, I understand it being in the draft to me is not, doesn't feel like we're, doing all a la carte, but that's where I stand on that. That's how I would like to move forward. I'm definitely not beyond Connecticut. And there's clauses within Connecticut that I think need further conversation, but that's where I am.
I guess, Michael, I don't understand what you're asking for.
Well, I mean,
For the document that you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah,
so every time we talk about this, we get a brand new draft, and I understand that's the process. But this is a very complicated subject. And it just feels like this is what we're looking at now. And I understand that there's different colors, and I just think it would be good for us to have, the actual document and us to go, one by one, do we really want this, to make sure it actually lines up with, the Connecticut language, show how it lines up with the Connecticut language, because there's some question of whether or not it does based on, the material that we've received. That's what I think. Unless you want to pass it out as Senate, as passed.
I don't. I guess I'm wondering, just as a baseline of this conversation, so Connecticut 2025 is a public document on the internet. Our drafts are all public documents on the internet. How much time have you spent outside of committee actually reading the documents that we're going through, as well as looking at things like, if you're saying Connecticut 25 as a base, how much time have you
I've
spent
spent
on?
a lot of time on this, and it's still confusing. And
I'm just wondering, so I've also spent a ton of time creating the documents you're asking for myself to understand this over and over and over again. And so we keep asking our legislative council for kind of things on the fly to keep doing these different documents. There are lobbyists providing different documents. There's lots of documents floating around. And I guess I'm the continuing to create documents and not diving in feels more or less just a stall tactic. Just wondering, when we're going to actually dive in.
Again, if you want a motion to pass a 71 as passed by the Senate, I will absolutely provide that. with Kids Code updated. You know, I just. The two of us will probably never meet on this.
No, that's fine. I'm just asking for you to justify and explain more in the weeds rather than
'Cause I'm
just
not-
going off of
I'm not-
what you're being told. I'm wondering for, I would love to have a conversation in the weeds of these different pieces with your personal thoughts of reading the lines and then we talk about it.
I'm not as confident that we need the structure that we're presenting. Like, I think we talk about, you know, data privacy, and I have a different view of data than you do. And I get that. It's just how I look at data. I look at it differently. To me, we're trying to claw back something that we've given out. Whether that's for a free service on an app, you know, whatever the reason is. And, you know, we're the ecospheres, we've heard from testimony about the troubles. It is not, I'm not trying to stall. If you, like I said, I would much rather just go with S71. Move it forward, and then if there's updates that need to be made, we can make those as we go. You know, we're pushing out Connecticut because it's going into effect this year, not already in effect. It's going into effect this year. That's where the committee has been heading. At least that's how I think it's been. But
Yeah, I guess I'm hearing lots of things with the baseline that we're starting with from you, even just personally, you started with saying Connecticut plus kids code, because that makes sense. And that's as passed by Senate and Connecticut.
so every time the committee moves beyond that, I become more, let's go backwards. And I think that's what the problem that you're experiencing with me is that the more you push, the more I'm gonna push back.
Sure. And the more that we go backwards, the more that we're basically saying that Vermonters shouldn't receive the same, if not better
You can-
protections than a just chosen model. The most palatable model at this time is, because everybody's being pushed to do it, is Connecticut 2025 as a base because we're supposed to be regional consistent. That doesn't actually ever even address the fact of what actually do we want for Vermonters. We're being pushed into a model. I'm just saying this is all arbitrary, right? The entire thing is arbitrary. And so we've never really said, like, what do we actually want for the protections for both the businesses and the people? And so all of this is an arbitrary model that we're starting from.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from in the sense that, and I just say that, you know, we talk about big principles and all, and what the proper model is. And I think we have probably differences around, you know, what those models should be. Another way to approach it is, in my mind anyway, is to actually go through, you know, the draft. And there which I mean, we've had Rick before us, but that's been mainly, in my view, an exercise of, you know, asking Rick, you know, what does this mean? What does that mean? You know, that kind of thing, as opposed to, well, we should really be adding this into it. And it would be helpful, I think, for me, in order to try to resolve those bigger issues, to have some time, if we have, to go through it's a long bill, but to go through it and say, you know, I like this, I don't like this, that kind of thing. And I don't mind having the colors. There are some things in the colors that I'm not real comfortable with. And, you know, if we have that discussion, I'd say so. There's some that I think I'm very comfortable with, and I'd say so. And then we could, I don't know, that would be the way I would look at it.
We'll have to start that process.
Yeah, and I know, you know, time's difficult. I appreciate it.
I guess from my perspective, I wish we were where we are now 2 weeks ago, because I think we've spent like many, many hours getting tested at national level harms and challenges, which are real. And if we were talking about a national bill, then that is key, right? So the way I see it is the national harms, the national picture is context. But what is incredibly important is like actual effect to Vermonters. And so we have not spent very much time with practical effects. We just haven't. We didn't really even start that maybe till last week. And we had the testimony from the woman from out west who was a practitioner of working with businesses on developing privacy policies. That was really helpful. We've had a little bit of testimony by letters from some businesses. Honestly, the chart that Maggie sent us is one of the most helpful things we've gotten. I understand it's coming from a certain perspective, but to me, I can't move forward with this until I understand, like, I've read it, I've read these things trying to understand it, but really understanding what is the practical on the ground effect of a change in the definition of biometric data, for example. It is I can read it and understand it, but I need to understand like what are the practical effects. So a proxy for me has become this idea of like sort of industry standards or regional. And the reason that's a proxy is because without understanding the practical implication for individuals and businesses in Vermont, I'm not comfortable changing things outside of a regional or outside of sort of a consensus or, you know what I mean? And so that to me is like, that's why I've fallen onto this proxy of like, okay, let's think about like, there's some consensus around S71 is passed with the Senate plus Connecticut amendments from 2025. Do I feel great about having a proxy? No, but I also am not comfortable with not really understanding, and so, not really understanding if anything we're having in Vermont that is unique, we need to understand what the implications are, because if our goal is to reach big tech, okay, great, except there's all sorts of individuals and businesses and nonprofits between us and big tech, and we could cause some significant harms in the name of protection. Or we get protection and we get harms. And so that's kind of where I have fallen. And so, this is a ton of work to go through and really understand each of these. And I guess I wish we had started this a whole lot earlier and focused on the national stuff as like context, and then immediately go into the actual bill, the actual words, the implications. Because it is hard and it's technical and it takes thought and it takes understanding multiple perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, first, thanks, Abby. Emma.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I mean, so one, first to address the national piece is we heard from a number of Vermont businesses and a number of Vermonters themselves, which is something we actually didn't hear from 2 years ago. To the number of hours that this bill does take is, I will assure you, thousands and thousands of hours. It is hundreds of conversations. It is hundreds of conversations with Vermonters. It is a town hall series I did all last summer and this fall, trying to meet with different groups. It is talking to compliance people. It is talking to investigative journalists who look into these companies. It is actually working for 6 months, driving a privacy program to try to understand from inside a company how this actually is set up and how this actually impacts businesses from the inside. It is also 2 years ago, our committee, well, actually before I even got here, the committee spent years trying to get a model. In 2023, the committee spent the entire session trying to do this bill. In 2024, we spent the entire session trying to do the bill. In 2025, we're waiting basically for a lot of outside of the committee conversations to be negotiated that never really came to a place where it could move forward. And then it was paused in order to engage Vermonters to figure out where to move forward. If we're talking about not wanting national interest, but saying that the memo is a source to put any type of anything behind, it's coming from the State Privacy and Security Coalition, which literally represents all of big tech. So you're saying you don't want to take stock in big tech and national interests, but literally the memo you're giving any weight to is literally created by an entity whose main goal is to kill privacy, state privacy bills. Very much documented in many sources, and and something that the seven of you have not had the opportunity to do is listen to other state legislators who we brought in 2024 to over and over and over and over and over hear all of the lobbying tactics, hear all of the stuff that we're experiencing right now with all the memos, hear the stalling, hear the stonewalling, hear the let's move the goalposts a million times. And so our own legislative council looked at that memo last night and said this document is highly subjective and opinionated. I can't really say that it's accurate or not accurate. For example, the left column presumes that there's a national consensus on an issue that isn't really something I can attest to. And why isn't anything in draft 3.3 categorized as aligned with a national consensus and thus in receipt of a green check mark? And literally everything in Connecticut 2025 aligns with a national consensus. I would argue that the national consensus is California because it has the majority of the population of the country that's behind one privacy bill, which, like I said, when I was actually working on building a privacy program, you look to California as the model because if you're trying to scale a business, that is the most protective. It is the one with the most guidance. It is the one that is basically what all of the states are trying to get to.
Yeah, my point is, if we had been at this place 2 weeks ago, but like,
We were at this place 5 years ago before I even got here. That's what I'm saying.
I get it. I
Yeah.
understand. And I'm not discounting all the work you've done. I understand that.
Yeah.
But that, like the committee, anyway,
Yeah, and I'm not taking that.
I'm not-
Yeah.
and I understand I understand all the information we get, and I put a lot of thought into like, where's information coming from, right? I get that, 100% get that, but it is important to, and as a committee process, it's not just you looking at the data.
Oh,
All of
definitely.
us need
Yeah.
to understand it and think about it and think about those multiple perspectives.
And I definitely, so I mean, I think I think a thing that's getting lost as well is like where we were in 2024, where this entire building unanimously passed a bill with a private right of action through both chambers. And it really just came down to lobbying to kill that entire bill. And that was that the entire building was engaged on that bill. But also, I don't get involved with things like the non-compete bill. You spent a ton of time on that. We have insurance bills that I don't spend a bunch of time on. I'm trusting other committee members. And I'm not saying you blindly trust me or anybody else on this committee. I'm just saying none of these bills are ones where we're going through as a committee line by line every single time saying, we like this line, we don't like this line. We like this line, we don't like this line. And then doing it every single day. None of the bills we work on happen solely in this committee. Every single committee has a lead on all of the different bills. They do stakeholder engagements. They talk with legislative council. They come back and say, this is what I learned. I want to walk through it with you guys. And then we decide as a committee on those things. I don't actually understand how much different this bill process has been than any other bill where you guys each take leads and then we talk it out. And sometimes the bill gets died. Non-compete died on one technical change that blew up the entire thing, and the committee spent a bunch of time like that. And that's fine. That is the legislative process, but I don't actually see how this process has been any different than that. It is way more hours and it's way more complicated and it's way more stakeholders because you actually do need to take in not only national, but also international perspectives as well as Vermont, because this does actually affect everybody.
Yeah, I guess I think I've been kind of zooming out a little bit with this whole entire issue and thinking a lot about this move fast, break stuff mantra that we've been living under for 25 years. I think that there's a lot of shielding that small big business does. This Abby, to your very clear point, there is a gulf between the biggest, most powerful players and all of the rest of us that need to conduct our lives in business. Yeah. And it's a shield, which I don't appreciate. We have known the concerns and the problems both for individual consumers for kids, for parents, for everybody. And they have been lobbying on both ends of the stick to make sure that they can run roughshod. I'm frankly quite over it. The risk to business, when I think about it, is twofold here. It's certainly the issues of like what regulations we put into place and the functionality and their ability to continue transactions and conducting business. But also there is being put in the position of being told by industry standard that you got to hold all of this data, whether you need it or not, whether you're checking, how much are you going in and checking your inventory? Like, do you actually need it to do these functions? Are you then putting yourself at risk being over data? A lot of the data security issues that we run into are looking for these really small players to get into the big players. They're looking for tiny small businesses that are vulnerable, that have a lot of overlay checks, and just they can swoop in and then be off to somewhere else. But the incredibly highly sophisticated ability to hijack people's computers, just shoving memory. Like there's so much going on underneath the surface that even savvy business folk don't always know and are not totally up to date. Like it's a pretty dangerous place that we're in. And I think that we oftentimes as lawmakers and as citizens who are trying to protect ourselves get led all over the map under the guise of business functionality.
So one thing that's been on my mind is the interplay between a cure period and a private right of action. And I think we've had the chance to talk about that a little bit. And so, we sort of had entertained the idea of removing a private right of action. And I think, Monique, I appreciate clarifying some of these issues about removing a private right of action and including the cure period. Simultaneously, that can be a little very limiting in terms of what individual consumers can do. I've been interested in a cure period, thinking about the amount of seasonal retail that we see businesses in Vermont doing, and that holidays are the end of the year. Q4 is when the volume takes place, and it's therefore when the compliance vigilance might be at a lower level because they're focusing on fulfilling orders, they're focusing on getting stuff out the door. And that might be would they need 120 days or 90 days to have that ability to get past that mission critical era and then go back and address concerns that would cynically arrive at the end of September. I think that I feel a little comfortable with the removal of the private right of action, knowing that it would go through the Attorney General's office, that the AG isn't doing it that way, that there's discussion, there's time. I think we've heard testimony that that's sort of the role they'd envision is one that is understanding of business cycles. I'm not dead certain that I feel that way 100%, but I do think having both the removal of the PRA and a cure period might be asking for more than we're trying to accomplish with the bill. With that in mind, I'd feel better about removing the PRA. Another topic that we had described was I'm trying to understand, and if I could ask us to go into specific bill language. I think this is all kind of going off of for everyone else's information. I tried to share some concerns that I'd heard with Monique, with Dave, the idea being that can we get a read on just what the response to these specific questions are. And so I'm trying to discuss them openly here. One of the challenges that had sort of come up was, can we talk about how contracts are formed? And I want to ask a question specifically, Monique, of what's taking place in 2415IA 7. This would be page 53. And I do wish that they would just have the top of the heading section on. And this has to do with take steps at the request of a consumer prior to entering into a contract. This is in the construction of duty section, and how subchapter shall not be construed to restrict a controller's, processors, or consumer health data controller's ability to a series of things. Can you help me understand what that means? I think previous things about provide a product or service specifically requested by a consumer, perform under a contract to which consumer is a party, including fulfilling the terms of a written warranty. An issue that I heard come up, there was a fear that this is going to cause problems with commerce, businesses being able to honor lifetime contracts. Can I hear more about what it means to take steps at the request of a consumer prior to entering into a contract? Like what is being articulated in that element in number 7?
Which one are you talking? Sorry, and
Yeah.
probably we should share the letter you're talking about. If
Let's wait until we have our legislative council here to start asking questions about specifics.
All right.
Language.
Okay.
I think that's more helpful than trying to do it on the fly. I think just keep like general
Comment.
conversation.
Okay.
Where I think I'd like to know where people are with, are we getting close enough to commit to 2025? There are specific areas that I think we need to move away from or move closer to Connecticut that we're not close enough to. ERA that's in 3.3, where are people on that? We are going to hear, there's some new language that we'll see from Rick as far as the healthcare goes. More language that we've been asked to consider from DFR as well as a couple of other potential players, and they're not from our banks or anything, but so those are things that we'll need to look at as well and talk about. But I mean, overall, and when we look at what Maggie presented, I'd like to actually go through that, because some of that is discussing kids code definitions that is that what the committee wants? Do we want to align those definitions that you have in kids code to what's in 7-1? Not important. I think we need to hear from Rick on that. Does that the alignment of those definitions? Should we have that? Is that a policy issue, or is that legally something that we should really consider? Those are, I think, some of the questions without Rick here being answered, but I'd just like to know where people are. If you get something new, that's fine, but it's not helpful, I think, at this point to just restate what you've been talking about with us. We know where your position is. But if you have something new you want to share with us, it's fine.
Regarding the previous bills, no, we keep on bringing up over and over again that what was the model of that bill in 2024?
Based on
Yep.
several states.
States. So, and based on it almost sounded like there was no concern about it. And I just want to be clear, that's not correct, right?
can I respond? So the base in 2024 was Connecticut, because as we left, so we spent all session 2023, and Mike was basically like, to our committee, we can start over again, and we're going to start from a copy of Connecticut, where it's at, California, or Virginia were our 3 options. And so it was decided Connecticut, and so that was the base which was built upon. And basically the draft from 2024 was looking at every single state privacy law, seeing where kind of the trends were going, see where the similarities were going, see where the needle was being moved. And that was basically what became 2024. And sure, when it started, yeah, lots of issues, like as far as like working through that. And then there was lots of things like financial and insurance is an example of something that was like highly contested. We're trying to figure it out. And then like we got to a place where we had the data level exemptions and we did a whole chart of every single state and federal financial and insurance law with Maria Royal to like figure out if what the goals of the committee were actually like matching, also just not interfering with that kind of stuff. And that's what led to like crafting exemptions. So there's lots of stuff over and over and over that was like, how is this going to affect somebody? There's lots of meeting with nearly every single, well, meeting with anybody who came forward who said, my client has a concern with this thing, we need to work this out. And that is where we were in 2024. So.
Right. And I know that you mentioned stall tactics and I would just push back a bit on that and just say the only reason why we don't have a data privacy right now is because we haven't passed the one that will get to sign the signature, right? And the only people that can prevent a data privacy from going into effect is us in this committee.
Yeah, I don't actually, the veto piece is not entirely accurate. The reason we don't have the privacy bill from 2024 is I got a call, so it unanimously passed the House, unanimously passed the Senate, got vetoed by the governor, and it got overridden by the House, the highest vote counts of the like 8 overrides that we had. I get a call the night before the Senate vote saying, we have 6 of your Democratic senators rolled against your bill. If you remove the PRA, then we will tell them that they need to vote on this. That was at the time, Mike had given an amazing private right of action speech on the floor after listening to Whitney Westerfield from Kentucky, who was a senator, Republican senator, about how private right of action is like an American value, like the going to courts and being able to defend yourself and seek redress for harm is a American thing largely. And so, we said, no, we're not going to just cave into lobbying pressure on this thing that's like arbitrary and strips rights from Vermonters. And so then those 6 Democratic senators voted against the bill. And one of them, my own, I said, why'd you do that? And he gave me a long-winded answer. And then at the end, he's like, you know what? I was a coward and I didn't understand and I was scared. And that's fine, but that is lobbying. Like that is the pressure that we're facing on this bill. And this is the pressure that every state, I could call up a number of state legislators who will answer the phone right now, including Maroney, and could say it on speakerphone as if you want what is not unique to Vermont. It is very much not unique to Vermont.
I can assure you that I am not a coward. Just so you
No,
know.
I'm saying that
Just for
wasn't you.
No, no,
That
I know.
was
I'm just
my
letting you
own
know.
senator. Yeah.
Believe me, just
Yeah.
letting you know.
Yeah, I'm just saying that was
This is not.
that was not directed to anybody
no,
in this
I-
room. That was
I get
literally
that.
what happened. That was the story of what
Right.
happened with this senator. Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear. Believe me.
Again, this was not directed to anybody except for the story between me and my senator. Yeah.
Sure. First, I apologize for being late. There's an accident on the interstate, so forgive me if I'm out of context with some of this stuff. There's a lot to unpack here. I very much appreciate the handout that Megan gave us. As you'd mentioned, it's very useful. And Megan, sorry. But there's a lot to unpack there. And the question is, do we have time to unpack all of that stuff? Because I would really, I would feel more comfortable with some of these additions if we're able to dig into the weeds and find out what the business community is concerned about, because this is what this bill is really all about. It's about balancing consumer protection with making sure that our businesses have the ability to do business in this state. And that's really what our goal is. And as far as a veto, and if we're going to get onto that topic, I will tell you how we can get the governor's signature. And that is if the business community around us says, we're okay with this data privacy bill, I'm 90% certain the governor's going to sign it. As far as the data privacy bill itself, forgive me, but I'm going to go through an old Bible story that talks about a man who was a debt collector. and he got wind that his boss was going to fire him. And he said, well, if I'm going to get fired, I'm going to go for broke. So he wound up going to all of the people that owed his boss money and said, hey, I know you owe me this much, but can you pay me half? And it turned out that worked out really well. And in the end, his boss decided not to fire him because he said, well, at least he got something. And I'm going to present that to you all here. Maybe it's not the perfect privacy bill. Maybe it's not the best privacy bill, but which is better? And this is what we need to ask ourselves. Sorry, a mediocre, half-assed privacy bill or no privacy bill at all? And that's really what it comes to. And if the business community says we don't like anything that you put in, just stick with the Connecticut law. If the business community, if that's the only way we can get the blessing of the business community, I don't think it is. I think there's room for negotiation. Is to pass the Connecticut law to the letter. That's what we should do, because some data privacy is better than no data privacy.
I have a, I don't disagree with that, right? Also, many of our laws are modifying things that are in place, and they have a start date of July 1 of the same year, right after we pass them. This bill, we haven't changed the start date yet. I wonder if talking about that a little bit so that folks understand what that on-ramp and what's an appropriate time frame for that would be helpful in this conversation.
3.3 is 18 months out. The draft he went through yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. So the most recent version did have
18 months.
out. But I think that that's really important. And I think that where there's no expectation of anyone to have to change significant practices without having the time. Like that's what I ran for office on, right? I you probably have all heard this, but like working in schools, education stuff, and we this body would pass laws that go into effect July 1. School boards don't meet until August or September, and there's not enough time to actually put the law in place to get it effective in the right. So that's something that I do try to pay attention to. Clearly I didn't yesterday, but but before we would actually vote. So I think that, like, is that helpful for folks, or is that not helpful for folks to talk about that 18 months or whatever time frame that would be?
I think that's helpful. Because that's been one of the things that I know was in the bill 3 years ago was also that support for businesses to actually be able to meet the mandate. And I think that that's a really key part, like, just like you're saying, Edie, with the actual implementation of so many of the laws that we do, we don't either give enough time or enough resource and support. So I think, getting back to the bill, like we had a couple of things that were added that are new, but I think the NIST stuff is really good because it gives you an actual guideline and spreadsheets and things that you can talk about. That's something that can be handed to the business community so that they can coach businesses on it. I think having things like that make it easier, that also will help breed trust with the business community and what we do, is very, very helpful.
I did want to say something about that memo. I had it open going through yesterday, and a number of the questions that I asked were in direct response to what I was seeing on that memo. There were parts of it that said this is in law nowhere in the country, and it was highlighted as directly from Connecticut 2025. So that's why I was asking some of those questions that sounded really silly, probably, because he's saying this is Connecticut 2025, and I'm like, wait, can you just say that one more time? Because, and I wasn't telling every bit, but I was going through there and I was very clear, like that. I worry that memo has a number of inaccuracies, and if we're going to focus on that as what we use to make a decision, we might not be making a great decision.
I'd like to go on record. I will reiterate and synthesize into my own language some of the points of view I've heard earlier. I am concerned about the effects on our businesses. We've heard that so many of our businesses are very small businesses. I'm sure some of them may not, fall under this. Some of them might. Those with national scope in their business will be subject to California and Connecticut standards already by the virtue of their business. So we're simply looking at the niche, the add-ons that Emily spoke of. Others may be more regional in their scope, in which case they would, again, most likely have to meet Connecticut standards. So that leaves smaller ones whose only business is within the state. And what are the effects going to be on their business and they having to implement this stuff? Or, are we creating a new niche industry of IT specialists, et cetera, that need to help these folks? And, is it going to be overly burdensome? That's kind of where I'm coming from. On the other hand, I'm fully on board with the need to have some level of data privacy come out of this body and get signed this year. We really need that. I've got kids, grandkids, all that, lots of screen time, lots of stuff entering their skulls full of mush, and we need to do something about that. So, as one of my bosses used to say, straight ahead and gun it, sport. So.
So when Rick comes in, doesn't have a new guy for us yet. I think he's looking for more direction from us. So I think what we need to do is language going through where do we disagree and where do we make changes? I hear what you're saying, Dave. Right now, and what everybody's saying, we don't have any laws on data privacy in Vermont. And we have a lot of small businesses that are operating within Vermont that without any regulation, they could be doing things that could harm their customers. And they're actually leaving themselves open to liability as well. I learned when I started here 22 years ago, we talked a lot about workers' comp and expanding the penalties in workers' comp. How can we do that? And for a few years, I had an aha moment. It's like, I'm a business. I own a business. I have employees. I have workers' comp. I'm not going to be penalized if I follow the law. So, there's that, and then the cost of business. I don't want to overburden businesses, but if our businesses are choosing to utilize technology to their benefit or their bottom line, then they have a responsibility to make sure that their customers have protection as well. So it's the balance that we need to find. Model law. There's model laws. You have model law in insurance. What's model law? Well, federal government doesn't regulate insurance. They left that up to the states. So we have the NAIC and we have NCOIL. And we create model law. Make sure that it's easier for the insurance industry to operate through all 50 states. But there's also, within those model laws, areas where we can make that Vermont centric. So we can deviate from, we want to go with Connecticut. There's no reason why we can't deviate somewhat to make that a Vermont. We've got to be careful that we're what we create is not just copying another state because we're told that's the only thing that'll work. We gotta think about the people, we gotta think about our businesses, and we gotta think about our consumers. What we're doing here is trying to create something that also protects our businesses. It's not just putting regulations on them, but it protects them from liability, hopefully. So I think let's keep that in mind when Rick gets here, we start having those conversations. Let's start going through and keep in mind our businesses and keep in mind our consumers as well. I think we get lost in one side or the other. You know, I've said it a lot of years ago. Our businesses can't make businesses without our consumers, and consumers can't consume anything from our business, right? So, and it's kind of like the same thing with employees. You have to have a business for employees to work at. Businesses can't exist without employees, so it's always a two-way street and we have to walk down the center of that as much as we can. Would you all like to take?
I'm just gonna ask if you take a 5-minute break before.
I just want, before we do, on SH 639. So we're going to delay action one more day. So the question that I had for you is that I met with the chair of Senate Economic Development a couple weeks ago, and we talked about 639. And she said, you know, is there an issue? Do you think that your committee would have an issue with having cure period 639? I said, well, we talked about it, and I said, if that's something the Senate wants, I think we can get it through. When we get it back, we understand that, and I was figuring it's going to be on, you know, the pieces that really make sense to have a cure period, but and when we get it back, everything's got a cure period.
Oh.
And that's we decided to go to conference. Well, that's an issue for them. So I'm going down there tomorrow to explain that to them, but I also have some language drafted that we should amend the bill that would have a cure period on all the pieces except for if your genetic data gets out. You can't cure that. There's no cure. And I think that's our issue here. And I just want to make sure before I put that on the table to the Senate that that is correct. That the committee, that's how the committee feels. I believe that's what I heard from and why we asked for a committee of conference.
Can I just add, we talked about this amendment at one point, and we decided that it wasn't necessary to have a cure period in the end because the most important thing was protecting that, the actual data, right, that somebody's genetic. But we would be asking them if they would be okay with that, piece of it that we put in originally, which was very clear which pieces of the bill could be cured. You know, your privacy notification, you know, different things like that. You can change, you can have time to fix, right? So we have, everybody here has seen that language already, is what I'm saying, on our website.
When we worked on 639, before we voted it out, we looked at it.
I can't remember that amendment.
Yeah, it's on, I can find the date.
I support that direction.
Yeah, okay.
No,
I'm okay with the direction. I just, you know, I don't have in my mind which pieces would be considered sort of technical cure issues and which was absent.
in general, you know, we would look at that before we make that amendment.
Okay.
So, I just want to make sure that going down there and presenting what the committee is thinking. And I think, you know, they put a 60-day cure period in. I think we were saying 14 days in what we were thinking about. I can live with a 60-day cure period as long as it's not containing a genetic data that's someone's of a consumer. So I just want to make sure that present that as the committee's.
I'm okay with that approach. I'd like to see the amendment.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm okay with that approach.
If they're,
A much shorter cure period, is that where you're?
well, I'm asking. if you
No,
can-
I mean, I think what Chair is saying is a longer, I think it's far too long.
That brings us
to our- But I'm okay with that approach, as long as it doesn't include curing data, the actual data being out there. And I'm not sure how opt-in is a really important feature there. So I don't know whether that would be included in the notice, technical, substantive, but anyway. I'm okay with that approach.
I'll present that. Talk to them tomorrow morning. This is where the committee wants is good, and I think 99% of their amendment we're fine with, because we're fine with the cure period. We can live with that. It's just on the genetic. Okay, why don't we take 5, come back, 5 after 10, and we'll begin our discussion with Rick.
I'm just sorry, I found the document. It is 2.1 from February 11th. But it's document 2.1 from Rick on 6/39.
Oh, I could probably find it in the bill.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, we can go offline.